This meeting is being recorded. Good morning. My name is Chris Cavanero and your host for today's webinar. If by chance you miss a webinar in the future, all webinars are recorded and uploaded into into SonicWall University. You can access a recorded webinar at any time by clicking the Events Recorded Webinars tab on the homepage of SonicWall University. We are constantly adding new webinars and content to SonicWall University and encourage you to log in often. Thank you for taking the time to attend today's SonicWall University webinar. During the webinar, if you should have any questions, please feel free to type the question in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And now I'd like to present Kelvin Peters. Kelvin, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Chris, and welcome everyone. Today we're going to look at a new feature that's been added to MySonicwall. It allows you to integrate MySonicwall logins with an external identity provider. So we're going to quickly look at the agenda in a moment here. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kelvin Peters. I work out of California and Hawaii, a solutions engineer out of California and Hawaii. We're always looking for ideas for upcoming webinars. And certainly, look for feedback for any webinars that we do put out there. So if you have any feedback or any ideas, just shoot me an email, and always, looking to, put stuff out there that, people really want, right? So we'll look at the quick agenda here. This is the only slide in the deck, fortunately, so we're not going to have a lot of slides to kind of run through. Most of it will be looking at the actual settings. So, obviously we're going to go over an overview of the MySonicwall IDP integration. And it really allows you to integrate into Azure, in this case, in Okta. So, from the MySonicwall perspective, typically today you're signing in and you're using essentially login credentials that are stored in MySonicwall, and you're using any multi-factor that you've enabled in MySonicwall. So that could be the Microsoft token, or it could be an email that is sent to you with your two-factor code. So this will allow you to use an existing identity provider, and so the user, from their perspective, once you enable something like this, they would essentially be able to log in with either their Microsoft credentials, including that token that might be attached to that user, or even the Okta user. So Okta, you could either have local users set up in there, or you could have even integrated Okta into another, could be like LDAP or something that you're getting your users to show up in Okta. And then again, you can use that same credentials from Okta, and if there's a token that's set up, you can also use that same token when you're logging in. So, I mean, what are obviously the benefits? Some of the benefits are, if an individual leaves the organization, part of the offboarding process, you typically disable the user account. Currently, I mean, you would have to remember to go in and delete the user from MySonicwall, because they would obviously have credentials outside of your identity provider, right? So currently, if you're just using the MySonicwall portal as the essentially the identity provider, you would have to remember to go in as part of the offboard process and disable the user account, right? So I've come up with this document here, kind of outlines some of these. Obviously, the benefits: single sign-on, again, allowing the user to use the same credentials, MFA, that they're using for other assigned applications. Ability to remove access from a MySonicwall user, should they leave the organization. And obviously a more streamlined process, allowing you to, receive pushes, on your cellular device. If you've, using the Microsoft Authenticator today with MySonicwall, you'll notice you have to manually enter the token into the web browser, right? So this kind of gives you a little bit of an easier login kind of process. So this document is essentially what we're going to essentially go through the config here. I'm going to show you the both from the Azure setup and from the Okta setup. And then we'll test it out and you'll see essentially what it will look like from a user perspective. And if there's any questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box and we'll try and get to those at the end of this session. This document, I will send it out to everyone that's on this call. So assuming you're registered with your email, I will send off this document so you have it. And it'll also be attached to this presentation, which will be uploaded to the recording in SonicWall University. So anyone who's watching it, just look for this document and you should find the same information there. All right, so let me get rid of that and we'll jump into MySonicwall. All right, so the first thing you see, I mean, obviously you guys are probably familiar with MySonicwall. How you get to this setting, it's actually under the user. So you'll see this little bubble in the top right-hand corner. You click on your name here, and then you'll see that there is an option here to use external identity provider. And you can see I already have this turned on and configured, but you'll see in here, this is essentially all the information that you do need to kind of pop in here for it to start working. You have two options. We're only going to cover the SAML, but you could also use the OpenID Connect as well. But for this purpose, for both the Okta and the Azure setup, we're going to use that from right then and there. So let me quickly go over to this one here. All right, so from the Azure side of things, what you want to do is create what they call an enterprise application, and they refer to it as a non-gallery type of application. So you would go out into the enterprise applications, choose new application, and then you'll see create your own application, and then this is where you see that non-gallery. So all that really means is there isn't one that's predefined in Azure. So you're creating your own application. And once you do that, you'll actually, let me go back because I already have it set up here. But once you do that, you'll end up with something that looks like this, right? So there's a couple of pieces that you need to do to get this to work. The first part would obviously be to put the settings in on the single sign-on side. And then you would assign any users that you want to have access to this application, right? So from the MySonicwall side, you would still be required to set up a user in MySonicwall that would have obviously the same user as being assigned in this group here. So there's really not much setup required. You essentially provide the identity. So that's the URL, right? The mysonicwall.com URL. The reply URL, so they consider this the assertion or consumer URL. So this is what you would put in here. And then you can put in a logout URL, that's optional. And down here, what I always do is I always just copy the metadata here, because if you guys noticed when we were, let me go back to the previous window. You can actually see here, actually I'm on the wrong user. Let me log out and log back in. And as you can see, I'm logging in. This is already set up, but we'll go back to the settings here. Oops, clicked the wrong button. All right, so we'll go back in here and let me get that other thing here. So I'm copying that metadata URL from the Azure admin console. And you'll see here, like if I delete this information, you'll see when I click on, I have access to the metadata URL and I paste it here, it'll actually fill out that information for us, right? I always try and use that because obviously sometimes you paste the wrong information in here. Kind of a pro tip is when you are setting this up on your user, what I would do is, set this up, you save it. And then what I would do is actually test the login. So leave this page open and test the login using a different browser. That way you can be sure that the settings are correct. Because if the settings are not correct, you're going to essentially lock yourself out. You'll have to open up a support case for them to disable this feature on your account so that you'll be able to regain access to it and then essentially try again, right? So just keep that in mind. Leaving this window open gives you that ability to come in here and review the settings. While we're in this window, you'll also see you have the ability to enable this on all employees of an organization. So again, if you do this and your settings are wrong, you're going to run into a situation where you lock out the entire organization. So I would always recommend setting this up on a single user, test it, make sure it works, and then flip the switch as needed. You'll also see there is a password down here. So if you're logging in from a SonicWall appliance or a mobile app, this is the password you would actually use. So if you're registering a firewall, this is the password that you would use, and you can always refresh the password to a new one if you want. All right, so let me just close this out. And again, I'm going to log out. I'm going to show you, what that looks like again. So this is the oops, if I can spell it correctly, we'd get in here better. All right. So you'll see as soon as I type that in, it doesn't want a password. It's essentially going to redirect me. And then I essentially log in with that user. Because I've already logged in and I already provided my token, you'll see that you'll essentially log in. So from a user's perspective, even if you go to like office.com, because I'm using those same kind of credentials and the browser has that information, as long as if you're logged in, you're going to see that you can easily log into all your applications just like that, right? So I mean, the MySonicwall will obviously be the same kind of give you the same kind of behavior, right? So let's just flip back over to here. I think there's just one other piece that I wanted to show. So if I go back, the next thing is obviously just to assign a user. So you can see I have a bunch of users assigned to this application. And that's essentially how this specific user is granted access to the MySonicwall portal. So if I was to remove this user, or if that user gets deleted, or the credentials are, if I disable the user, it would reflect in the MySonicwall. So this is a kind of an important concept, especially if you're using a lot of the clouds services. So if you go to like cloud.sonicwall.com, if you're using Network Security Manager, or if you're using Wireless Network Manager, or if you have Capture Client, or even Cloud App Security, any of these use the MySonicwall credentials. So having the external IDP and being able to enforce and remove access as needed, is probably something that a lot of people are looking for nowadays. So this is essentially going to give you the ability to use those credentials straight across the board in the MySonicwall world, right? All right, so let me sign out of this one. And we'll go back to this one. So this one is the, let me log back in. clear the browser. Give me a second here. All right, so let's look at the from the Okta perspective. So let's go in here. So essentially what you do is you create an application similar to what you do in the Microsoft world. So you can see here I have an application and I've assigned this single user to the application. And that's essentially it. So let me go back to the application here. I'll click on that. I'll show you the settings. So much like the integration in Azure, you have a single sign-on URL. They have a couple of different fields. Essentially, for our perspective, it's all the same URL. And then this audience restriction, which is essentially that entry URL, which is the MySonicwall.com. So once you define that, that's essentially all you need. And then you essentially just add in the users that should have access to that portal, right? So let me go back here and see if I can. All right, so let me see. So as you can see, I get the Okta login in this for this account. Just gotta get the password. And then I'll get a push on my mobile phone here. And then you see I should log directly into MySonicwall. Let me just go and we'll look at the settings for the Okta setup. So again, similar to what it looks like from the Azure setup. Again, we're using SAML. We put in that SSO URL, which we've got from Okta console, and then the certificate, right? So those are the two pieces to that puzzle. You can actually see it here. If we go to general, actually, I think it's sign on and then view SAML setup instructions. This is where you get that information, right? So probably have to delete this now that everyone's seen it, but this is essentially the settings that you put in there. This is the single sign-on URL, and this is the certificate. I believe you can use this one if you wanted to use the metadata option, and that's essentially how you would go about setting that up. So not too difficult to set up. Again, some of the gotchas is, when you do, attempt to set up, leave this browser open, right? Log in with a different browser, make sure that the setup is working before you close this browser, because obviously if you close this browser and then you typed in the wrong SSO URL or the certificate or something isn't working correctly, you'll essentially run into a scenario where you're locked out. One other thing to point out, when you go to MySonicwall.com, it sometimes remembers the actual login. Let me find mine because I think this would actually look like. Give me a second. So you've probably seen this before where the user is already in there and there's a pencil mark. That's one of these gotchas. If let's say I had enabled it on this user and it's remembered like this, I actually have to hit the pencil, retype it, and then it'll trigger the actual IDP. If you just look at it from the previous window, it'll actually still look like it wants a password. So you'll try and put in a password, and it's obviously just going to fail, right? So that's another thing just to kind of point out when you're logging in. So I always say, when you try and log in, obviously retype the username, and that should trigger the redirection, right? Because you should see essentially when you try and log in, it should not require a password. It should automatically redirect you to the IDP sign in, right? All right. Well, with that said, that's pretty much all I had. Like I said, this document with all the settings that we looked at essentially is inside this. So it covers both the Azure and the Okta. And I've even put in that, kind of note that you have to retype the user. If you guys, look to set this up and you have any issues, don't hesitate. You can always reach out to me. And I'm always happy to, point you in the right direction if I can. I guess we'll turn this over. We'll see if there's any questions that have come in, or is there anything that comes to mind after seeing this demo. We'll give it a few moments. Just doesn't look like there's any questions that have come in yet.
No, I don't see any questions coming through.
All right. Well, if anything does come up, you can always reach out directly, and I always respond to email. So if any questions come out after this, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. And thanks again for attending today's call. I'll pass it back over to you, Chris. Oh, actually, wait, we got one. I think we got one question that just came in. So there's a question that says, with Azure, what's the difference between sliding the all users and putting users into the Azure integration? So it's a two-step process. So MySonicwall, you would actually have to enable the external IDP integration on the user. So by sliding that little slider from that window that we saw, I think I'll go back to it here just to show you. So this is the, I'm logged out. Just log back in real quick here. So this button here, essentially it'll enable this IDP on all users in the organization. So all the admins that are tied to this same SonicWall, MySonicwall account. From the Azure perspective, so if I did enable this and I didn't put all those users into that Azure group, the user would get redirected, but would not be authorized to log in, right? So you would control the authentication at that point, right? So that's why you can actually have a MySonicwall user with this enabled, disable that user, and then they no longer can log in, right? So that's essentially, it's a still two-step process. Like the user would have to exist. There's no way to sync the user into MySonicwall, right? So the user has to, exist in MySonicwall, and then also exist in that group or that list of users in the identity provider users that are assigned that application. All right. I don't see any other questions come in. Hopefully that answered your question. But again, if you have anything else after the call, you can certainly email me, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that come in. All right, Chris, passing it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Calvin. And we'd like to thank everyone for attending today. This meeting is ended and you may now disconnect. Have a great day.